So today we are going to explain everything about competitive Call of Duty Esports in under 10 minutes. So we are about to go through it all. Here's the timer, sliding it down to the corner, and let's get right into it. Let's go. So CoD is different from many other esports. Call of Duty as a game is inherently casual. So there are extremes in the types of Call of Duty that is played and the players who play it. So of course, there's a massive spectrum in the millions of Call of Duty players that play, from your casual team deathmatch players that hop on for like 30 minutes or an hour per week, to your pro players whose lives rely on this game and how they play. And there's a spectrum of the game modes, from, again, your TDM or your kill confirmed, all the way to your hardpoint in the CDL or your S&D in the CDL. And there's massive differences in the game modes, the rules, and how it's played. So let's first focus on how the pro scene is organized, and then we'll talk about how the game itself is played differently, and then how you can become a pro. So right now there is a franchised Call of Duty League. 12 franchises paid the franchise fee of approximately $25 million last year to join the league. And of course now the league is formatted drastically different than what it was the past like 10 years with Major League Gaming and the Call of Duty World League of the past. So the schedule and how it's formatted will moderately change, in the upcoming year or two, as the league is still figuring out what's the best method or the best format to use. But just like any other league, there is a regular season schedule that leads to Call of Duty championships, usually in August at the end of the season. So in this season, for example, each team hosted a home series where 8 of the 12 teams attended. And the 8 teams who were there at the series would compete in a tournament that would reward CDL points based off how many games you won. So there was a 10-point bonus for the team that would win, but for example, the first place would receive 50 points because of 4 wins plus a 10-point winning bonus. Second place received 30 points for their 3 wins, and so on. So at the end of the year, after all of these home series, all of those points would be tallied up in the standings, and the teams would be seeded based off the standings for COD champs at the end of the year. So the next question is, how are these teams even constructed? Considering the esport is 4 versus 4, there are 4 starting spots on each franchise team. So each franchise is allowed up to 2 two-way players, and you have to have at least 1 sub. So the two-way players can be your sub plus another player, and two-way players mean that they can also play in the amateur scene. Similarly, each franchise generally has a coach and a general manager. So you may ask, how do these teams actually come together? How do these teams get signed to an organization? So that happens in roster mania. So after our first season, we had a big roster mania going from 5v5 to 4v4 the past 2 months or so. There's a few ways in which these players can get connected to their organizations. The first one is where a group of players, maybe a full team of 4, kind of comes together and decides, all right, we want to team. Now we need to find an organization to be our franchise team that we play underneath. That's going to happen less and less, though, as kind of players get established to certain organizations. A franchise can approach one player or maybe a duo to create a roster around that player or that duo, and that's kind of how they put it together. They let those players do a lot of the work in networking and building their team from the ground up. Or there can maybe be a combination of all of those, where one player gets signed as the captain, and then 3 other players are like, all right, we want to play together. I think this player would work. Let's play with that guy. There's a lot of ways that can go down. When it comes to contracts, there's a salary cap, like in the MLB, for example. If a team goes over the salary cap, they pay a luxury tax on all of that excess salary that's over the cap, and that can get pretty expensive. The minimum salary for a player is $50,000 plus benefits, and some players have some massive deals in hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars that they're getting paid to play per year. So think of the CDL like the NFL, the NBA, or the MLB, where the pro scene is completely separate from the amateur scene because of franchising. Just like in the NFL, NBA, or MLB, amateur or college teams don't play against those sports, so amateurs don't play in official matches against any pro team. So it is just overall completely separate. The amateur scene is built around challengers points, aka pro points, which is what all of COD was built on in the past before franchising. So in comes gamebattles.com, aka GBs. GBs basically was the heart of competitive COD for the better part of the last decade. But on Game Battles, aside from tournaments, there's casual XP ladders, and then there's challenger point ladders. Teams and individuals can earn up to 100 points per week by winning matches in the challengers points ladders. And then there's online tournaments each week, like 2Ks and 1Ks, where winning players are awarded 1,000 or 2,000 points for winning the tournament. As for events, there are amateur events alongside each pro event. Each weekend there's a home series. So there's big open brackets where potentially a few hundred teams compete online and are seeded by challengers points, which you have earned throughout the year. Of course, that changes a little bit when we have LAN play again, where at LANs you have to buy team passes to compete in the LAN environment at the events themselves, and that'll generally be either 32 or 64 teams, which again is seeded by pro points at the end of the day based off what you've earned throughout the year. So now let's talk about the differences between competitive and casual Call of Duty as a game. A casual COD player will hop on, play some TDM, kill confirmed, maybe some domination, or maybe even some pubs S&D. But in pubs, aka public matches, that's going to be 6 versus 6. That's the first difference. Competitive COD plays at 4v4. And then in different game modes, they'll have different rule sets. For example, in Search and Destroy, in pubs, you're only playing to 4 rounds. In competitive COD, you're playing to 6 rounds. And in pubs, the timer can be different. For example, it takes longer to defuse. There are going to be minor rule changes in competitive COD to casual COD because it plays more competitively with those changes enabled. Similarly, there are items that you can use in-game, or guns or weapons or things like that that are deemed not competitive over the last 10 years of Call of Duty, and they are not allowed in official CDL rule sets. Some things like C4, RPGs, LMGs, and a lot of other weapons, usually shotguns, sometimes marksman rifles, and certain other guns won't be allowed because they just aren't very competitive and aren't fun to watch or use in a competitive COD environment. The most confusing aspect, I think, of the rule set for a lot of people is gentlemen's agreements, or aka GAs. GAs are basically invisible or kind of understood rules that pros agree to play by that aren't officially rules in the CDL rulebook or in the competitive rule set as decided by the CDL and implemented by Infinity Ward or the developer of that year. So for example, this season, Auto Tac Sprint and the AUG were GA'd. So the Auto Tac Sprint was a sprinting mechanic that you could turn on, a setting that pros agreed not to use because it was not competitive and made the gaming experience worse in the competitive environment. But the CDL never implemented that as an official rule, so Infinity Ward, the developer, never implemented that into the game itself as a competitive rule set for the CDL playlist. And there are a lot of rules and guns that are GA'd by the pros but aren't officially implemented as rules by the CDL, and this is something that I think a lot of players are hoping can get fixed in the future, where GAs will quickly be implemented as rules by the CDL, and then we'll be able to see those changes in the in-game rule sets from the developer pretty quickly. And teams follow these GAs because if they don't follow the gentleman's agreements, they'd get blacklisted from scrims, which again, scrims is their practice. So if a team breaks the GAs, they're not going to have good practice for the upcoming time until they decide to actually follow the gentleman's agreements so that they can practice pro teams again. And the amateur scene follows the pro GAs that the pros decide to establish. So the final aspect is like, how do you go pro? How does one go from playing TDM to then one day playing competitive Call of Duty on the main stage of a CDL event? So the process is actually a little bit more difficult than it used to be now that franchising is in place. Before, it was all based on pro points. The people and the teams with the most pro points would qualify for the pro league. Nowadays, you have to know the pros to join the pros. So starting off, you kind of have to find a squad to play competitive COD with. Hopefully future Call of Duties will have ranked play, where that's a good place to start for people who are just learning the game. But really your career starts on game battles, GBs. You have to start grinding GBs. The goal is to start playing pro point ladders matches as soon and as much as possible. And as you start gaining pro points, you're starting to play in 2K tournaments, and you're playing in those 2Ks, trying your best to finish top 64, then top 32, then top 16, then top 8, then top 4, then finals, then winning. So through this whole time, you're networking to getting to know a lot of the amateur community. You're becoming known in the scene as you start to win more, and eventually you've got to start winning a lot of tournaments and then start winning the big tournaments. And of course, that is going to take a lot of time and a lot of practice, and through that time you have to start networking and getting to know the pros, weaseling your way just slowly but surely into some of those pro circles, becoming friends with a lot of the other amateur COD players, and building relationships, hopefully with coaches and teams as you're doing all of this at once. So then hopefully one day a team will want to take a chance on you, let you scrim with their team for a little while, and then eventually, if you're good enough, you'll get picked up by a pro team, or there's an expansion team in the league where the team expands to 14, 16, 18, 20 teams eventually. And probably first as like a sub player or as a two-way player. You know, you're technically on the team, you're getting paid by the team, but you're still competing in the amateur side of Call of Duty. And then eventually you get your shot in the starting lineup. So there it is, competitive Call of Duty. Obviously, there's a big time learning curve when you first get going into learning the gentleman's agreements, the rules, the game modes, and the unique specific things that are attributed to competitive Call of Duty versus the casual Call of Duty. But I hope you guys enjoy the video. Our time is up. Like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you next time. I'm out.